Welcome to the Quantum Leap Podcast, everyone. I'm Christopher DeFilippis.
And I'm Albie.
And tonight we have a very special guest. Please, one and all, join us in welcoming one of the creators of the new Quantum Leap to the show, Mr. Bryan Wynbrandt. Bryan, welcome to the Quantum Leap Podcast.
Glad to be here, guys.
You're not any more glad than we are. I have been just like, is it chomping, chafing at the bit? Whichever one that is right. I have been dying to speak to you ever since the new show premiered, and we are so thrilled, and we feel very lucky to have you on the podcast because, Albie, you had been discussing this earlier. Is this sort of, do we have a quasi exclusive here? Or
I think this might be a world exclusive. I know Bryan and Steven did interviews leading up to the premiere of Quantum Leap, but when the reshuffling all happened, everybody wanted to know what happened, what's going on, but a lot of us read the original script that you and Steven did, which was amazing, and we just want to know all about the story and, of course, your fandom, what caused you to get involved in Quantum Leap in the first place, all that kind of stuff. So world exclusive. I'm excited. I'm a little fanboy right now.
Yeah, if you can tell, we're a little bit amped up. But I guess maybe before we get into all of it, if you'd like to just give a little bit of background, tell us how you got into the biz, tell our listeners how you got involved with writing and producing, and maybe bring it up to Quantum.
Sure. I started back in 2005, the early aughts, with my writing partner, Steven Lilien. We were, just trying to make it in the biz and writing spec scripts together. And we got staffed on a show called Kyle XY that was an ABC Family original about the boy with no belly button. I'm sure you guys remember that. Yep. That's what it was about. And we wrote on that show for 3 years. And when that show ended, we created a show called Alcatraz for Fox. We pitched it to J.J. Abrams, and it was sort of like it was a pinch me moment because, we're sitting there with J.J. Abrams. He had just done Star Trek. And I remember being in the theater when Star Trek ended, and I was like, man, I need to work with J.J. Abrams. And like 6 months later, we were like, front of him pitching this idea. And he partnered us up with Liz Sarnoff, who was coming off of Lost, and we wrote it, all of us together, and did the show together, but it was a short 13-episode run. And it was sort of like we were on a rocket ship and it stalled and kind of headed back towards Earth. But, don't cry for us. We ended up on CSI New York. And from there, we went to Hawaii Five-0, kind of got our chops in doing the network procedural thing. And then we went on to Gotham, which was so much fun. I loved that show. And during that time, my partner and I created something called God Friended Me that was on CBS, which, funny enough, when we were pitching that show, we said it was Quantum Leap meets Touched by an Angel with a social media twist. And the reason, Steven and I both shared a deep love of Quantum Leap together. At the time we had inquired, as many writers did, about doing a version of Quantum Leap, a reboot. I know you guys had Trey Calloway, I think, on your show, or at least
we did.
So Trey worked with us on CSI New York, so I know Trey. And I remember he did something, but there was a rights issue. There was an entanglement, so it was just a pipe dream. So we kind of created God Friended Me as our quasi version of, instead of leaping into someone, Miles would get a friend's suggestion and change their lives for the better each week. And then he had a group of friends each week that were helping him. And that kind of, that was an important sort of structure because it became something that we used as a stepping stone for Quantum Leap, the reboot. And after God Friended Me ended, the pandemic hit, and Steven and I we weren't sure what we were going to do next, and we were approached by a production company doing a show called La Brea, and they needed the creator of La Brea, a really smart guy named Dave Applebaum, had created his first show, and he was looking for co-showrunners to help him run it. We had not worked with Universal before, so we came on that show, and season one, the three of us together, we hit it out of the park. It was a huge hit for them. And we get a call one afternoon from an executive over at Universal. And she says to us, we love you guys. You're great. We have this script deal with you, and we have this project. It's been, sort of lost in legal turmoil for years and years and years. You may have heard of it. You may not be a fan of it, but have you guys ever, do you know Quantum Leap? And I remember where I was in my backyard. I got teary eyed. I was like, yeah. And they're like, we want you guys to reboot it for us. And they were like, it's not 100% closed, the deal. So, there's still some legality, but, and we were like, hold on, you want us to do it? Like, there's not going to be like a fight to the death amongst writers to see who gets the job. And they're like, we want you guys. So it was like, breathtaking. I mean, it was a huge moment in my life. I mean, this is like a dream project. So that was like sort of, I want to say September, October of 21. And no, that's wrong. September of it was like 2020. It's 2020. So during that period of time, Steven and I started incubating the idea of the series. And really what the core thing to us was like, you're never going to create a bromance like Sam and Al. You're just not going to do it. So we came up with the idea of like, let's make it a romance. Let's make it a love story. Let's make it something like, they're this couple that are divided by time and space, but can be together, can't touch, and make it surrounded about around a romance. And we pitched it to Universal, and they freaked out, and they're like, "That's it. That's the take we've been waiting for. This is awesome."
Since we're maybe getting into some more of the meat of it, if I could maybe back up just a little bit to frame the discussion, in terms of you saying that Steven had an abiding love for Quantum Leap, you had a great affinity for the original series. Can you take me back to how you discovered Quantum and what in Quantum Leap spoke to you, and were there touchstones of the legacy series or a checklist of things that you knew you needed to incorporate as you were crafting this revival?
Yeah. So, I mean, I was born in 1978. So the show came out, 89, I think. Right. So I was 11 years old. I just remember watching it. I've always been a huge science fiction fan. So it was like just immediately like, wow, this show is so awesome. And I always had a connection to it. I mean, I remember in those first few seasons, like, the episode with the drag race, I loved that episode. There were certain episodes. And then of course, I mean, for everyone, I shouldn't speak for everyone, but I know for Steven and I, Sam's Leap Home, that the story with his brother, which where he sings Imagine to his sister, and he leaps into Vietnam to save his brother, like that cemented my love for the show. And so the checklist was not so much like a specificity of like, we've got to do our own Vietnam episode, for instance. It wasn't anything like that. It was like, we've got to do episodes that are like touch the human heart in a way that like that show, those episodes did, that do the wish fulfillment that we all wish we could have that chance that, to save a loved one, to talk to a loved one, which is why, not to jump around, but when we wrote the original 89 earthquake episode, he talked to his mom. He got that chance. That was like a really important, that was going back to the original pilot episode, right? The original,
mm-hmm.
Don Bellisario original. What was so great about that episode, beyond just his writing is great, and how, I mean, you just don't really get a Scott Bakula very often, who's just inhabiting this role and making it work. And then also Dean. the story of him trying to reach out to his father was so profound and impactful to Steven and I that, when we started to develop the revival, we were like, we wanted to sort of pay homage to that. So that was part of also the reason. That was a checklist for us. We wanted Ben's mom to be what Sam's father was to Sam. Those were important things. And then we had definitely wanted to bring, like, magic being a part of the project was something that we had always conceived. And like, because that episode was so important to us, we were like, well, what if magic is the one running the program now? That would be just like mind-bogglingly awesome. And the episode where he talks to Ian on the bench about what it means to have leaped, that was something we talked about early on with Ernie, and something we had said, this is going to be a moment. You're the person who can put the audience in the mind's eye of someone who's been leaped into. And so those were certain elements. And, we wanted Sam in the show. I mean, we wrote the original version. We wanted Sam to be working with Janice. That was part of the show. We can get into why that didn't happen, but that was part of it.
Right. So I want to maybe, okay, now we're up to back where I interrupted you. I'm sorry. So you were able to pitch it as the romance, not the bromance. So we knew that we would have the star-crossed, time-crossed lover aspect. But when you were conceiving of making a show for the modern era, because the original Quantum was so much of an anthology series, really, and it was just a two-man team, what considerations did you need to take into account for the current network environment? Was it always going to be a network show? Were they talking about it for Peacock? Was it always going to be on NBC proper? And how did that shape the way you approached it?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, we actually, originally they said to us we wanted for Peacock. That's what they told us. And so we were sort of originally, I mean, there was a version very early on where we're not going to connect it to the original series, because we were like, well, if it's going to be for Peacock and it's going to be for a modern audience, what if we just take the bones of the show and, Deep Throat will get to Sam and all that stuff eventually, but sort of decouple it at first. And then when we started to realize this is going to be a network show, we're like, no, we got to lean into like what Quantum Leap was and make it more connected to the original, like in a very, straightforward, like on the nose way. Like, and that's where magic came from and all that. In terms of the considerations of the current storytelling style of just what we're all used to in the streaming age and, ongoing storylines, that was something that like was really important to us. Like, we can't have this just be a two-hander only, And so when I spoke earlier about God friended me and the structure of that show and having a group of friends who are helping him help the friend of the week, which is essentially the leap of the week, we were like, we need a team around him. And so that's how we conceived of Ian and Jen and Magic being along with, Addison and Ben. And so that was our like gut instinct, is like, we need an ongoing serialized story. We need some storyline that feels like it's pushing the sort of uber plot of the show. And in God Friended Me, we had this big mystery question: who's behind the God account? And each week, as they were, helping friends, they would get closer and closer to that answer. And so for us, it was like, we were like, for us, it was about, how do we get to Sam? How do we get Sam home? I mean, initially if I had it my way, if I could have waved a wand and done it the way we wanted to, this first season would have been about getting into the world. Sam would have been in our time. He would have actually inhabited a person who he stayed in for a while, got in touch with Janice, and then through Ben's story, sort of what happened at the end in season 2 with how they went to pull Ben out, but Addison ended up with Ben. in a similar kind of idea. And it's something that Drew Lindo had even like said to me. He's like, "Oh, we're doing something like from the original idea, which was this idea of what if we go to pull out Ben and Sam, but Sam comes home, but Ben stays out there." That's how I wanted to end season 1. And then what I wanted to do was, and Steven, we wanted to do this idea that like, Sam's home. What's that look like? What's it like having him in the world? The tricky part was, it's not up to us whether Scott decides to be in the show or not. So all of us wanting him to be in the show, he has to have the desire to do it. And I think for him, especially with Dean's passing, I think he felt that ship had sailed. And he was very respectful. He was complimentary of the pitch. Don and Deborah spoke to him and tried, or I know Don definitely did, but he just wasn't feeling it. He wasn't feeling it. He felt like his story had been told. So that's ultimately, it wasn't like a big conspiracy or, it wasn't a Hollywood story. It was just, he passed on the idea of being in the show. And I know, Steven and I and the guys who took over always felt maybe we could get him, but he just was staunchly, not interested in, he's so respectful of Don's version. And even though Don had absolutely given his blessing to our version, and one of the best experiences I had on the show was when Steven and I had a Zoom with Don and he gave us notes on our first draft. And he said, "Man, I wish I could have writers like you." When I was doing the show in the day, I was like, "Whoa, that I can die a happy man hearing Don Bellisario say." Because I was worried, I was nervous. I was like, what's Don going to think of this? So, ultimately, that's sort of the story with Scott. He respectfully passed, and we had to respect his wishes, and we did. And we tried to pay homage to both with having Magic and then having Janice Calvici in the show. But obviously, I think all of us would have preferred the version of the world where the alt universe, where he said, "Yes, let's do it." That just
Yeah, the quantum leap nerd in me has a lot of questions about the logistics of that, considering what happens in mirror image. But that's a much deeper discussion. I'm sure we can have that. But so you have this concept now where it's going to be more of an ensemble and a team piece. So tell me how you went about crafting what Back at the Project was going to look like, because we got scant views of it in the Legacy series, and your project is almost a complete 180 from the New Mexico project. So when you were developing the team, the characters, what kinds of things did you want to introduce, and what kinds of things did you realize that maybe you had to leave behind from the Legacy series?
Yeah, we definitely talked about Ziggy and all of the characters from that original series, and talked about what, who from that could we bring in. And we just felt we wanted a clean slate in terms of that regard. We wanted to start fresh with a new group of characters. Jen was someone we thought would be a fun, we always designed that Jen and Magic had this like almost father-daughter dynamic, that he looked after her and brought her into the program. Ian was someone who they had an incredible knowledge of coding and had been a huge student of Ziggy and the technology. And so we knew we wanted someone who embodied kind of just a personality and a character that unlike you had never seen before. And Mason's incredible. So, on the page, Ian was, I remember we wrote Ian in the original draft, I think in the character description, it was something like they were really good with computers, but not with people. But then when we cast Mason, Steven and I started spending time with them in Vancouver, and we're like, no, that doesn't work because Mason is great with people. And we have to refigure the character. So, which was a great thing. I mean, every one of these actors brought something to the story that was better than we had thought. You know, Caitlin had a sense of humor that unfortunately was sort of parsed out of the show more and more because in our vision for her there, we did want there to be a little Al in her, and that like Al had there was some comedy chops there, and Caitlin has that. It wasn't written that way enough. And Ray is one of those people who, like, just like Brandon Michael Hall playing Miles, it's just this crazy thing, this like alchemy. You find these people who are actually like, if someone was leaping and saving people or helping people through Facebook, you'd want these two men to be the ones doing it. They walk the walk. They're that good of people. So he brought this soulfulness to the character that was even more than we could have imagined. And Ernie's just Ernie. I mean, a legend. And then Rissa brought an edginess to Jen that was also something that wasn't quite her audition. She did this hilarious thing in the audition. We got her audition, and this is during COVID times. Well, post COVID, but we're still, everything was over Zoom. So we get her audition, and she's drinking a beer. We wrote this side that was sort of was more about her backstory of how she had, like, as a young woman, broken into the NSA as a lark and got in trouble, and then Ernie, or Magic, bailed her out. And she had this beer, and the way she was doing the scene was just so funny and so opposite of what we thought. We were like, oh my God, she's great. We've got to cast her. So each character was truly, the actors all brought something to the character that wasn't necessarily there on the page. I'd like to pretend that like it's all us, but it's not. That's the beauty of casting. And so when we brought this team together, that was a really important part, and we wanted to make sure that they had stuff to do. And that was like the goal from the jump, was like, this team, it's not just Al and Sam this time around, and it's not just Ziggy in the background, it's not the characters who were sort of there but weren't, and you didn't really get a sense of them, and they were like, one had bad breath, and it was like, you just was like, we wanted to dig in deeper, and get to know them and do more. And I will say, Steven and I are the ones who jettisoned the waiting room.
Can talk about that. What was the very practical concerns, I would think, with that?
It was the one thing when we watched the original that we just never really felt like, everything felt so grounded, and that piece felt fakey to us. And we talked to Deborah about it, and she understood. I mean, I think her concern was that the fans wouldn't land for them, but it was the one thing that, like, Steven and I were like, in our version, we're not doing the waiting room. We're not going to talk about it. Maybe it's in the background somewhere, but there was that episode with where they, like, remember the serial killer or some crazy person.
Killing Time. Yeah, it's one of our faves.
And he escaped, and it was wild. But that was like season 5 stuff or season 4 stuff or whatever. So yeah, that's when you're running out of ideas. So for us, we were, I know there's been talk online of like, why no waiting room? That's us. We were the ones who made that decision, and just for us, it didn't work for us, and so we weren't gonna do that.
Was there ever a conversation about whether or not Deborah would reprise her role as Ziggy and actually voice the character again?
There was, and in fact, she did in the original pilot cut, the cut that was tested, we had her do the voiceover, and it was amazing. The decision was made to have Caitlin do it. Ultimately, I think was, it, I think it was about sort of not, taking a step forward and not feeling like you were stuck in the past. But if I had it my way, I would have had Deborah do it. But that's just me.
Right. You're talking about the Saga Cell. They did air that Saga Cell, I think, once at the top of season 2, with Deborah doing the spiel, doing the recap, and then they sort of did away with it almost altogether as the season progressed. But was there ever discussion of having Ziggy be a character back at the project?
Yes, I mean there was, but I think it really became sort of something that for us, it was going to be dependent on where the storyline went. It wasn't going to be forced, and it just never there was never an organic way into it. And who knows? I mean, maybe if there was a season 3 or 4, who knows? But yeah.
Going back to the original script, I remember reading it and tearing up towards the end. And I was just like, wow, this is Quantum Leap, and Quantum Leap is back, and this is going to happen. It's like something I never thought would happen. How did you feel that it was actually coming back and it was actually going to happen?
It was amazing. I mean, I remember being up in Vancouver filming it, and I was there with my wife, and we had dinner one night, and I was like, I can't believe this is happening to me. Like, I can't believe I'm actually making Quantum Leap. It just blew my mind. We did right before we filmed day 1, we did a whole prop show and tell, and I held the original hand link, and it was just, I mean, it's the stuff that you're like, you dream of, and it's one of those things that, I'll cherish forever. The fact that Steven and I are associated with this incredible series, and that we were the ones who rebooted it. And it was our vision that brought it back, is something that, I take such great pride in. Hollywood's difficult. You don't always get to see everything through to the end. And, for us, the series was going in a direction that just, for us, it was just the simple fact that they wanted us to redo that pilot to do the heist episode was for us, it was tough, because I just didn't see the show. That to me wasn't what Quantum Leap isn't about heists. It's about humans. It's about people. And so it just became clear that like our vision of what rebooting the original was going to be something different. So that's part of our decision to step away. But the experience is in no way tarnished by that, because it's just amazing. I mean, you're just standing on set, you're like watching Quantum Leap being made, and it was awesome. It was an amazing experience.
I'm thankful that you did bring it back, and I love the start you gave it, you and Steven. Take me back to that day, because I'm sure so many people are curious, like what happened, because we really don't know what happened, because nobody's really spoken of this before. Take me back to that time where you and Steven and the network and things that you decided to go your separate ways, and for them to bring in new showrunners and stuff. Talk us through that project, because it had to be a huge decision, because it's Quantum Leap.
Yeah, I think, for us, it wasn't like a clean break, like we're never going to talk to anyone involved in the show anymore. It was just, again, it was a matter of the direction moving forward, and what was best for, us, and for the show, and for the direction of what, the show wanted to be. For us, it's an emotional journey. It's an emotional procedural, if you will. It became much more, I mean, I have no issues with the show and how it was done, and I nothing really negative to say about how they did the show. Wouldn't have been how I would have done it, but that's fine. I mean, that's why we made the decision we made. going back to that time, it just was a lot of cooks in the kitchen, as they say. And, eventually you have to, when you're a showrunner and you're running a show, like whether it's La Brea or God Friended Me, you have to be able to make your decisions. You have to be able to cast the people you want to cast, tell the stories you want to tell. And of course, you're going to always get input from the studio and the network and your producing partners. But it just got to a point where, because the original pilot didn't quite turn out the way we had hoped for a multitude of reasons, it's not one person's fault. I don't even necessarily use the word fault. It's just you get things up on their feet and they don't play exactly how you think. And when that happens, there's always sort of like, that this is a business that's governed by fear a lot of times when in the executive suites. It's like, oh my God, what if this doesn't work? This is Quantum Leap. So again, like that conversation began of like, let's come up with a new episode. Let's give it a little more action. Let's give it a little more of this. And it just, got to a point where it's like, I didn't feel, and Steven didn't feel, we were going to be able to make the choices and decisions. It was going to be decisions by committee. And for us, that just wasn't a tenable sort of situation. Not to say we're totally collaborative people, but ultimately you have to feel you can tell the stories the way you want to do it. Like on God Friended Me and La Brea, we could do that. It wasn't going to be that way. And so for us, it just felt best for us to take a step back and let the new showrunners come on and sort of take it from there. And they did. And, kudos to them for getting a season 2. And, my only critique is there was a lot of exposition in season 1. It felt very expository, and the team felt like they were just reading the news, which was not the way it was designed to be. But, at the end of the day, I can't do anything at that point. Once we take that, that sort of like EP role in the background, you've got to let the people who are now running the show do that, and I kept in touch with all the cast, always spoke to them all the time, and was reading the scripts and gave thoughts on editorial on the cuts in season 1. And by the time we got to season 2, Steven and I were already working on some other projects. So we just didn't have really any sort of day-to-day, or even like we didn't really weigh in on any cuts in season 2 or anything. But I think they course corrected really well from what they did in season 1 into season 2. And I did think the show was moving in a stronger creative direction for sure. And I thought it was really smart, bringing in a different love interest, because I mean, what's a love story if there's no, potential strife in the relationship? So I thought that was great. And, like I said, I think those guys did a great job ultimately in the end. Would I have done it the exact same way? No, but you have to, when you're stepping away, that you can't really, you can't cry over spilled milk. You've got to walk away and let the new people take charge. And it's not the first time it's happened, and it certainly won't be the last time it's happened in this town. It happens all the time. And so it is what it is. But, I don't really like dwell on that part of it. For us, it's more about just I was just texting with Caitlin today, talking about some other stuff, and like, I golf with Ray, they have dinner with Nenrissa, like the relationships that I made on that show with the cast in particular, because we became very close making the pilot, that never goes away. And that's really what it's all about. And, now the show isn't moving forward. I hope like in a few years, someone else will get a chance to reboot it, and do their own thing. But like, these are people that I'll be friends with for the rest of my life, the cast, and hope to bring them onto the new shows that Steven and I are currently working on. So, it's
awesome.
it is, that's what it is.
In a parallel universe where you and Steven were able to make your decisions without a committee interfering, and you stayed on. What would we have seen in the first 2 seasons of that version of Quantum Leap?
Well, I will say I didn't have it planned out beyond season 1, or I mean, honestly, we were in the process of building the season. I think, we did have this awesome episode that we wanted to do where it was the fall of the Berlin Wall, and we wanted to do this incredible story behind, a reporter who was reporting from the night that the wall went down. And this is a good example of like how we had thought about story and what we wanted to do with the show. And it goes back to like what we loved most about the original Quantum Leap was that over the course of the episode, I won't bore you with the details, but you get to this point at
Please
the
do.
end. you get to this point at the end where Ben, in the role of this reporter, is trying to get back from East Berlin back to West Berlin, and he starts a chant that actually is he's like essentially the penny that drops in the pond that creates the ripple for the wall to come down. So it's like, remember how, when he leaped into young Stephen King, or he affected young Stephen King, or he gave Peggy Sue to, we wanted to do those things like that you would have saw some more of those kind of episodes. But, to be fair, I think that the guys who ran the show did a great job of they did the show justice. So I have I don't have any I don't have any sort of notes on their version at all. I just think, it's hard to say what ours would have looked like because we didn't get a chance to do it. But, at the end of the day, the original pilot where Ben is thrust into the earthquake, and it's about a story about a son and a father and a relationship. It would have been more those kind of stories, those a little bit more emotionally driven stories in that way. And by the way, maybe that version doesn't even get a season 2. Who knows? So it's like, like I said, I think everything happens the way it's supposed to happen. So, there's no regrets, but I think for us, we always saw the show as an emotional story engine. And, I still think that it certainly was it for sure, but I think it, for us, the original pilot, the original, earthquake episode that you all read, that was the more of the feel we were going for.
So I guess I maybe get into the weeds a little bit, because I know when you're pitching a network show these days, you have to have basically an outline for an entire season. Even if you don't have every single story broken, you have to sort of know where the end point is going to be. And since you left relatively early in the process, you still built the architecture that season was going to be based on. Can you speak to what was specifically stuff that you had intended that lasted, that stayed throughout the season, whatever, even if it's just a general framework, or even more specific stuff that I guess maybe they started with, so they were compelled to go along those lines because the story had already been set in motion in that direction. I don't know if I'm being precise, but
no. Well, here's the thing. The truth is like, we didn't have we didn't have like a very clear 100% approved map forward with. So, when you pitch a show, these days, you want to talk about, okay, for instance, I'm trying to think of like when we pitched God Friended Me, we did not know. All we knew is like when we were pitching that show, like in the end of the first season, we wanted he had this backstory with his mother who had been killed by a drunk driver, and he was going to have a friend suggestion for that drunk driver. That ended up becoming the 10th episode of the season. and we had 20. And so what ended up happening after that was all brand new. So like we didn't have like we had talked about some of the architecture that was there in season 1, but not Leaper X and all that stuff. Yeah, that stuff was not, we had not, that was not in our original pitch or Bible. The one of the things we had talked about was that Ian was like the evil Leaper thing, was like that Ian had from the future had come back and spoken to somebody, but these were like, none of it was set in stone. So what became season 1 was really, was truly like mostly the new showrunners sort of took little kernels, but really they were driving the ship of season 1. We had talked about the idea of, we had talked about someone from the NSA coming in, or someone from Washington being a part of the story. But I'll be honest, it's like I don't even remember exactly, because it was like at that time you have to realize like when the show got picked up, they were like, we have to write a new script, you have to staff a show, you've got to build sets, you've got to get the show up on its feet, you got to figure out how you're going to turn the pilot into another episode. We're building the space episode. We're coming up with that episode. That episode that was going to be the Wall episode, the Berlin Wall episode, was going to be the 3rd episode. But then, for reasons, just again, this is where it's like, you don't get to make those choices. Suddenly, they wanted something else and became the boxing episode. We had broken. We knew in episode 4 that which was sort of like the episode with Justin Hartley, the actor from Tracker now, where Ben leaps into a woman and proposes. We knew that was going to be an episode where he starts to remember Addison. So what we were really more focused on was like, what are the beats of the emotional journey for Addison and Ben, and like when is he going to realize, remember like, oh my God, I leaped and I was in love with this woman. But beyond that, there was very little, so like the episode, like in our version, we did not go back to beyond Ben's lifetime. I mean, I give credit to the other guys. They did the whole Wet Wild West thing. That was not in our version. Sort of, I forget what the name of that episode was, but I guess it was episode 5, right? The one where they go back.
Salvation or Bust.
Yeah, Salvation or Bust. Mm-hmm. So that episode was entirely, that was like a demarcation point. So from there, and obviously 6 came after that, and that was the episode we had Rich. But beyond that, it was like from that point on, that was just they took it and they made it. So I've read online that there were like comments that like, oh, they had to follow what we had done. That's not accurate, because there was no set plan, of an agenda. And clearly, no one would have to follow the agenda of the guys that they said, weren't seeing, that the network and the studio weren't seeing eye to eye. If they were seeing eye to eye with us, we wouldn't have had to leave the show. So, the show really took on a new path. And, again, like, I think, kudos to those guys. They did a good job, and they got the show picked up for season 2, which I've been able to do a couple times in my career, and it's not easy. So, that's how that all went.
I have a couple of specific questions, Albie. Do you mind? I know I'm hijacking a little bit, but
don't mind a bit. I'm enjoying this.
when it comes to maybe some of the nuts and bolts fan stuff, was it always your intent to have Ben be able to leap beyond his own lifetime?
That was not. It was not something that we had really. We had talked about doing it at like making it a special episode, but we definitely wanted to stick with the original kind of original rules. But what we did talk about as a way of like kind of making that work was that he could leap within because that Sam had created a sort of the idea was like that if he was leaping beyond his own lifetime, it would be within Sam's lifetime. Now they went to like the 1800s and stuff, which that's totally I get it. I get why they opened it up because I definitely feel like we were very stubborn about some of those rules, with everybody. Like we wanted to really stay true to like, no, he's got to stay in his own lifetime at first. But the reality is how cinematic is like 2000, how cinematic is 92, so it's like, it's like beyond the cars, it's pretty much the same. So I totally get why those guys ultimately made the decision to go beyond. I think that was the right decision. But that was not something that we had that was not sort of something we had set in motion.
My second really specific question, I noticed in the second pilot in the whatever the Live Aid date was, I can never remember the title of that one. And also in the Atlantis episode, you had very specific callbacks to Sam's legacy. And even in the boxing one, I know that you were peppering that stuff in with Samantha Stormer. And was that going to be something that culminated into a bigger piece of the story, or was that just little Easter eggs for fans like us?
It was little Easter eggs for you guys. I mean, maybe ultimately if Steven and I had stayed on and, had been able to like take a step back, because, once you get the show up and running and you're doing a million things, you maybe we would have had the time to go, oh, maybe there's a way to make this all kind of like work. But no, like, yeah, I mean, like Steven was the one who was like, let's make the pilot, the daughter of, from Sam's first leap. And so, and all those little Easter eggs were definitely stuff that we wanted to do, that we were, just peppering in. But ultimately, we didn't have like a big game plan for like making all those things sort of connect 100%, but probably we would have done something like that had, we had the time and thought to do it.
And I think I might have said Samantha Stormer. I meant Samantha Stratton. If anybody's name checking me here, I apologize.
Yeah, you threw me there. I was like, Stormer. I'm like, wait, I thought it was Stratton. No.
Shock Theater, Samantha Stormer. That was what Price Gloria, right? She was in two. So yeah, we go deep here. We go deeper on the Quantum Leap podcast.
You sure do.
Mm-hmm. So if you ever get that call again from NBC Universal, do you want to do Quantum Leap again, but this time your way? Would you say yes, or would you politely pass?
I think my time with Quantum Leap was an amazing experience, and I think it's time for other people to come in and give it their own spin for sure. We had our shot, and it worked. I mean, you can't say it didn't. We got 2 seasons worth of television, and Ben Song and Addison Augustine, and Jen Chu and Ian Wright and Magic. Like those are our characters. Those are our babies. So even though someone else raised them, ultimately, we gave birth to them, and like I said, I take tremendous pride in that, and I cherish the relationships with all of the people from the show that I keep in touch with, and so I have no reason to revisit it other than to watch as a fan.
Well, Bryan, it's just amazing that you've come on and you've shed so much light on so many questions that the entire fan community has had honestly, since the switch happened behind the scenes, and we were all just wondering what was the issue. And so, thank you for enlightening us. Thank you so much for your candor and for the generous time that you spent with us. Before we go, do you have any messages for the Leapers out there who are listening?
Yeah, I would just say, like, bottom line is this show is a labor of love by everyone who did it. Myself and Steven, the showrunners who came on and took over the show, the actors, the writers, the producers. I know everyone has, it wants to know, whoa, what happened behind the scenes? And sometimes it's just not as interesting as you want it to be. I mean, bottom line is everyone who worked on the show did so out of love. And the show was in great hands throughout, from when Steven and I had it to the guys who took over, the cast, Deborah, Don, everybody, came at this show with love. So it's one big family, and the Quantum Leap family, is the community. We did it all for you guys. I mean, because you guys are us. I mean, we got the experience of doing what we all would dream to do. We just happened to be the lucky few who were like given this incredible opportunity to be able to carry the torch. But there was never a moment throughout, whether it was Steven and I, or Martin and Dean, or Deborah or Don, or all of the writers, that we weren't thinking about the fans and wanting to make the best show for you guys. And I think the only thing we wish we could have done was to bring Sam home. I think we all wanted to do that, each and every one of us. And that's okay, because now he's out there with Addison and Ben, and they're all leaping around and making the world around us a better place. And by the way, we need them out there as opposed to here in these day and age. So yeah, I would just want everyone to know that, like, focus on the love, because that's what this show was about for everyone who did it. It was a labor of love, and it was about the fans. And I'm just so glad that it was well received, and that there's such passion for this show, because it's absolutely, for this property, it's one of the best properties around. And I'm really appreciative for the time to chat with you guys.
Well, I think I'm going to speak for fans everywhere to say thank you for bringing our favorite show back to life. And thank you so much for the time you spent with us today on the Quantum Leap podcast.
All right, guys.